they asked us they reached out to us and they said, we love you to speak, but we actually have another idea. Would you guys be open? We listened to the Dirt Talk podcast. Would you guys mind doing a live podcast for our audience? We think they'd really enjoy it. And we were like, yeah, we can give that a shot. So it was our first ever live podcast. And I think it went pretty well considering we'd never done it before. Yeah.
That's fun. That's very fun.
And before us was a general that spoke. So the bar was set very low. And I think we disappointed everybody, but that's okay.
Cool.
Now that we're squared away here, do you partake in winter sports if you're up in the hills pretty close to the thick of things there, or what's the winter look like for you?
I do. I ski often. I'm not very good at it. I've been skiing my whole life. I just never got really awesome at it, but I enjoy it. I like being outside, and it's gorgeous from the top of the mountain. But my kids are like, Mom, please. And they go into the trees and on the moguls. I'm like, I'll just see you back and buy you lunch. It's fine.
Yes. That's what, so my brother, like I said, he's in Denver, so he's skiing every weekend. And then I remember my mom visited him last winter, and she skis maybe once a year, so she can get down the hill. She can do her job. But my brother, he wants to go to the moguls, the double blacks, every time he goes down. And she wasn't super stoked because it's like, I come up here one day, I just want to ski with you, and yet you don't want to ski with me.
How about just a couple of chairlift rides? How about that? Can I get that? That would be great.
Yeah, give me something. So what is your background formally?
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist by training. And, I went to all those stinking years of graduate school, which I loved, $70,000 worth of graduate school debt. And then I get out into the world of being a therapist, and I was like, uh-oh. I don't fit well in this profession. I'm just not patient enough. And I actually see things more through systems and cultural change. So about 4 or 5 years in my role of being a therapist, I thought I need a different kind of role. And so I worked in leadership development for a while at a university, which I loved and was a very good use of my psychology degree, helping young people find their niche in the world and how they want to make an impact. And then in 2004, my brother died by suicide. And that was the before and after moment of my life that eventually leads me on a journey to get in front of you.
So go back to school when you're trying to become, and we'll go back to where we just were, but when you're going to become a psychologist, what does the schooling actually look like? What do you even learn about?
So my degree is a doctorate in psychology, which is different than a PhD, which is a doctorate in philosophy. So PhD level people, they do a lot of research. They're really focused on the research end of things. PsyD, which is what my degree is really focused on the clinical practice side of things. So in my program at the University of Denver, we would learn, about the history of how people have thought about psychology and the mind and well-being and community connections and so forth. And we are very interested in things like mental health diagnoses and assessment, and then treatment. What are different treatment models that people have found successful and impactful? And so we would learn and get a lot of practice. That's another difference between a PsyD degree and a PhD degree, is that doctorates in psychology, we get a lot of field work in helping clients and groups and families try to improve their well-being.
So before you're even out of school, you're getting that practical experience.
Yeah, a lot of it, which is really helpful to find like what suits you and what's your niche and stuff. And, it should have been obvious to me throughout that process. I loved learning. I loved all of the learning, but then doing it full time. I wanted to be over there stopping the things that were driving people into the office. Like if we just didn't have that event happen to you, you wouldn't be here suffering so much. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. It's weird. This is not really relatable, but it is. I was like a fish out of water in engineering school. So I went through engineering school and I just did not fit into that path that engineering school pushes you. If you go through civil engineering, you become a civil engineer. And if not, like, what are you doing there? And it's a weird feeling being around all these people that are destined on this predetermined path for them. And you kind of thinking, that just doesn't, I don't know. I don't, it doesn't feel right for me. It's not, I don't think that's my thing.
Right. I remember going through
Um,
like this like strengths assessment thing with my colleagues at the counseling center at the university. And they all had such cool counseling strengths. Like, I don't remember what they are, but like intuition and, all these beautiful counselor strengths. And I had like, whoa, which is all right, fine. And like achievement. And I was like, oh gosh, such a superficial person. But now I know. Now I know that
yeah,
I'm an impact
that's
entrepreneur, and all of those strengths serve me well being an impact entrepreneur.
sure. So going back to 2004, your brother dies. Can you unravel that a little bit? How did that
Yeah.
come about, and what were you feeling after that happened?
Yeah. So, my brother, in many ways, was a magical person. He had a lot of strengths in his personality that made him a magnet for other people. He was charismatic and funny and smart and driven and visionary. And so we called him the Pied Piper because people would follow him anywhere. And he was also like a super risk taker. So he was
Mm,
fun to be around, but you were also always going on a big adventure. Great athlete, all that stuff. And so in his sophomore year in college, he made a bunch of really dumb decisions, and he got himself kicked out for a year. And my dad was just beside himself and worried about his son. And so marched my brother's butt into the psychiatrist's office. And the psychiatrist told my dad, hey, we think your son has bipolar condition. And my brother said, I don't know what the hell that is, but I'm fine. You know what? I don't,
mm,
it was the late 80s. No one's really talking about this kind of stuff. And he said, just don't worry. I'm fine. I will be fine. And in that year, he just knocked it out of the park. He found a job selling encyclopedias. That's how dated this story is. But, he had a lot of gifts in sales and managing and influence. And so he became the top salesperson for this encyclopedia company, went back, got his degree, and was doing really well. The
mm,
After he graduated, he got a job in the insurance industry, and that's when I started seeing the wheels wobble. So I'm off at the University of Denver studying psychology at this point, and my only sibling, my younger brother, is sharing with me anxiety and self doubt, which I'd never heard before, and in these rambling recordings, and I'm worried. So, as big sisters sometimes do, and I'm like, hey, here's some things, here's some resources. I'm here to help. Like, here's therapy things to check out, some self help books, I don't know. Here, try this, try
mhm,
that, try this, try that. And you know what? He did. He tried a whole
mm,
bunch of stuff. And over the course of his young adult life, my brother tried many things, medications, different types of therapies. My brother fought really hard for a long time, and no one knew.
mhm,
All they saw was the incredible success. He ended up launching a company in his mid-20s with like $10,000 in pocket, in his pocket for capital to launch a new business. It went national by his early
mhm,
30s, and he had all the trappings. He had the homes and the cars and the clothes and the stuff and employees everywhere and all of this thing. And he was really highly regarded, but nobody knew that he fought fierce depression, um, holed up in his
mm,
basement, sometimes numbing out with alcohol or marijuana, and also trying to get well in many other ways. Like, they never saw that part of him. So the backstory is
mhm,
we knew for a long time that he had these experiences, even though most of his professional and friend circles didn't know. But he managed it. Like, that was the story. He always found a way to manage things and come through it and just be vibrant and successful over and over again. What happened in 2004, we don't really understand, but for whatever reason, in that summer, for the first time ever, the upswing of the bipolar condition, the mania side, got completely out of control. It was always there, but kind of in the lower ends, which actually fed into a lot of his success. He had energy and great ideas and creativity and influence. But in the higher end of mania, things get unraveled. And he left his
mm,
family and he moved into $1 million loft in downtown Denver that he didn't have inspected, which was a real problem later on. He bought an $80,000 car. He cut ties with his business co-founder and operations manager. It was kind of the yin to his yang, and tried to launch another company. But he was so unwell. Like, it wasn't going well. He couldn't find support because he was very erratic. And one of the most heartbreaking pieces of that part of our story was that, and it's true for a lot of people that experience mania, is that he didn't really have insight at that moment that what he was doing was potentially reckless or dangerous or was impacting other people. He just felt so sure of himself. And he got very angry when any of us who loved him expressed concern or worry. I remember calling him like, "Hey, oh, a lot of changes going on here. Are you all right?" And he would say things like,
Mhm.
"You know what? You don't know me.
Mm.
I should have made all these changes a long time ago. I don't need you." And then he would hang up on me. And he kind of
Mm.
did this to all the inner circle people. And so it was just heartbreaking, and there's really not a whole lot you could do during that time. But then things turned around Thanksgiving. So for months, he's estranged from the family, estranged from his closest friends, and just making decision after decision after decision that's wrecking his life. Um, and then around mid November, we can almost trace it to the day he met with his accountant, and his accountant said, "Dude, you're broke," which is another hallmark of what happens with mania. People just spend all their money. You're broke. You have no more money. You can get no more money. In fact, you're in tons of debt. It's over. And that news was the flip flop piece where my brother went from agitated, mean, reckless mania to the worst depression we ever seen. Um, he lost 30 pounds. He didn't sleep at all. He was filled with regret and self loathing. And gratefully, he came back to all of us. I think in hindsight, he came back to say goodbye. But for 2.5 weeks, we
Mm.
had him, surrounded him with love and support and tried to get him reconnected to resources. But I think he was kind of resigned at that point. Um, yeah, the last time I saw him was a Thursday night, and we got together. And he said, he couldn't read very well at that point. He was very agitated. He couldn't focus. And so the family had all read this book, The Unquiet Mind,
Mm.
which is an excellent book if you're trying to understand the experience of someone living with bipolar condition. So we had all read it, and it gave us a lot of hope because the person who wrote it had lived with the extremes of bipolar condition. And she had, through trials and tribulations, found a way to live in recovery. And I said, "Look, Carson, here's this other person. She's public like you. She's very accomplished like you, and she's gone through something similar, and she's figuring it out, and we will too. There's hope. There's hope. There's hope." And he turned to me and he said, "But Sally, it's madness." And 4 days later, he killed himself. So that's the part that
Can
really
you
fires me up.
Yeah, um, no kidding. Can you explain bipolar disorder? 'Cause, the terms bipolar is thrown around a lot,
Yeah,
but most people, I don't think, understand what it actually is. I've lived around it, most of my life. And so I've had personal experiences with it, not me battling it, but watching others. And
mhm,
it's tough to be around somebody with that. But just explain what is bipolar disorder.
sure. So it's a health condition, like any other health condition. It's on a spectrum, which means there's more intense forms and less intense forms. And just like any other health condition, people can move up and down that spectrum all the time. I don't
Mhm.
truly identify as being on the bipolar spectrum, but if you looked at my life, you would probably say, "Oh yeah, she meets some of the criteria." So um, what it mostly means is that people have episodes of depression, um, and also experiences with higher than average energy. Okay, so on the lower end of the spectrum, we call that hypomania, which means people just have a more energy. They sleep less. They often are doing 20 million things. Sometimes that energy gets filtered into things like spending or substance use issues or, sexual behavior or other kinds of things. But it also drives things like creativity and charisma and humor. A lot of people who
Mhm.
have um, or who are stand-up comedians live with bipolar condition. It's very common. because they can tap into this part of themselves that is very in that energy space, more courageous or risk taking, and allows them to do things that other people can't do. So there's a lot of upsides to it as well. And I would say that for me, those upsides are, helps me be an entrepreneur. I can do things, I can take risks that other people wouldn't take. Creativity and ideas, that kind of stuff. A lot of our artist community also live on the spectrum, and so on and so forth. So that's the part that people like to dabble in, because people have actually written about hypomania being actually a optimal mood state. You have sometimes euphoria, a lot of optimism, a lot of confidence, those kinds of things. A lot of drive, that kind of stuff. But with bipolar condition, that doesn't last forever. So at some point, you will have an episode of depression, and nobody likes depression. It is awful, painful, debilitating, and you lose that sense of yourself being driven and accomplished and charismatic, and all of those things that you like about yourself. So that's usually when people start to reach out for help, is when they experience that first episode of depression. And here's the kicker: if the treating person, whether it's your primary care doc or a psychiatrist or whomever, only sees the depression, doesn't know this other piece of you, sometimes they'll give you medication that actually flips you into mania. This is another common problem with this disorder,
Mm.
is that then you have this very debilitating, too much energy state. That's the higher end of the bipolar spectrum. That mania piece that I was describing about my brother, where you have unbridled energy. You are not sleeping at all. You think you can do things that aren't actually quite possible, like even like religious connotations of feeling like you're some kind of superpower, really dangerous things like you can fly, like all of these kinds of things can happen in those extreme manic states, that can absolutely ruin people's lives. And so there's this very difficult dance that people with bipolar condition often find themselves in, is that, how do I retain the things about me that are me? Because sometimes the medication that people get put on take away that, and I don't know who I am
Mhm.
anymore. And so that's why people go off and
Mhm.
on and off and on their medication. And it's not just that. My brother was a very handsome man. That was another piece of him that, gravitated people to him. He was a confident, handsome man. When he was on lithium, which is often the medication of choice to help regulate, like just squish the moods a little so they're not so extreme, he gained 50 pounds, which it doesn't feel good,
Mhm.
and so there's a lot of complication in managing bipolar condition. But what many of us have figured out is that when we are focused very much on our wellness and our well-being, some of that takes care of itself. Not all of it. Some people definitely need lifetime medication management, but try prioritizing sleep even when you don't want to, like prioritizing sleep and eating well and exercising, and all of those wellness practices really help people manage the extreme highs and lows, a lot of the time. I hope that was enough.
Yeah,
I'm not a neurologist. I'm very much more, psychologist level of explaining it.
that's very helpful. No, and we'll get back to the just living healthy, because I think that's a huge missing
Yeah,
piece in a lot of people's lives right now that
yeah,
contributes to a lot of mental problems. But what so how did your life change after this event with your brother? How did you feel, and then how did you change your career after that happened in 2004?
yeah. So my brother died 2 weeks before Christmas. He died December 7th, which actually also happened to be 2 weeks before his 35th birthday. He was born Christmas Eve, and my parents told me he was my Christmas present. It was actually my very first memory. I was 2.5 years old. I took that very seriously, and we were incredibly close. It was also 2 weeks
Mhm.
before the Asian tsunami hit. So if people can remember back to that day, it was, a world event that everybody was paying a lot of attention to. And so when I looked back, months and months later, I realized that what our family was going through, and his closest friends, there's 5 children in the world today that were named after my brother, and they're not his children. Like his friends named
Mhm.
the kids after him. And, that's the kind of power and influence and connection that he had with people. So those inner circle friends too. Now, what we went through was our own tsunami after his death. The first couple weeks were very much an experience of drowning. Um, this is a trauma on top of a profound
Mhm.
grief for many people. Many people don't see it coming at all. We saw it coming, kind of. We knew he was thinking about suicide. He'd not have a suicide attempt before. He promised he wouldn't do it, which is also common. And these kinds of suicidal things ebb and flow. And in that moment, he had a very good reason for living. So, but when it happens, it's just so devastating for many people. And it's grief and trauma, a sudden death that is, you don't have that anticipatory grief that you would have with a long-term illness. And I'm not saying any death is
Mhm.
easy. They're all hard. But when you have a long road before the death, you can say things, do things, make amends, ask for forgiveness. All kinds of things can happen. With a sudden death, you don't get it. With a traumatic sudden death, there's just levels of horror and stuff that just makes it really hard to process. So that first couple weeks, for some people, months and months of drowning sensation, life doesn't make sense. All of your world views are shattered, like you can't function. I had been on maternity leave before his death. We had our third child in September of 2004. I still was working at the university, still working in leadership development, but I had been on leave for my baby. And then when he died, they just threw in everything they could, donated PTO, holiday leave, bereavement leave, just to get me through the holidays. And then I had to go back to work. And so the second kind of connection to that tsunami metaphor is the going back to work piece. I had to go and I didn't want to. Like, I didn't care about anything, let alone
Mhm.
like running a leadership program. Woohoo. Why does this matter? My life is done. Like, I don't have a reason for living anymore. I don't want to go to work and like do this stupid thing. But I went in January 3rd, and opened my office door, and my desk was piled with well wishes and cards and stuffed animals and flowers, as we tend to do. And my inbox was jammed with condolences and love from people I didn't even know. And I thought, okay, that feels pretty good. Not everybody gets that after a suicide in
Mhm.
particular. Um, but it was like coming up out of drowning and then like looking around the landscape, and everything was moved, everything was different. It was unfamiliar territory, I guess, if we're going to continue that analogy. And so I trudged on. And again, luckily for me, my workplace was a Jesuit school, a Jesuit college. They got grief at a really deep level. Again, I feel really fortunate for that. And they just said, whatever you need, you can have. And I was like, okay, I think I need help. And so they gave me
Mhm.
accommodations around going to see a grief counselor and taking leave to go to, accommodations in my schedule to go to grief support groups around suicide. And all of those things helped tremendously. Um, the other piece was that it was in the early days of the internet. So the ripple effects, this kind of news travels fast. But it was unprecedented for our experience in that time, how fast it traveled through social media and all of those things. And then how long the tail of the impact was. I mean, a decade later, I was still getting messages from like high school friends who were just finding out and being traumatized a decade later that he had died. So that was also powerful. But I think like one of the biggest pieces that was aha for me was like the aftershocks. Was it was never ending, never ending. And this is also true for a lot of trauma and grief experiences. But every single month there's something. There's a birthday, an anniversary, a major holiday, and you've got to mentally prepare
Mhm.
yourself for all of those. But it was the unprecedented aftershocks, the ones that you weren't expecting, that really threw you for a loop. And I remember going through the box of things. It's actually right there. You get a box of things when
Mhm.
somebody's passed. It's the pictures and the memorabilia and the notes and everything. And the letters he wrote me when I was at camp as a child, like precious things. Um, and I stumbled across this photo that I thought I had lost. And it was of us dancing at my wedding. And, I've told these stories many times, and I get to this point in the story, and I'm always like, uh, because we had a song. And,
Mm.
not a lot of siblings have wedding songs, but we did. It was Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. And we would, when we were together, like driving around, we would crank it up and sing it at the top of our lungs. And so that night, we're flinging each other around the dance floor. It's at the end of the night. My hair's all coming undone and his tux is all untucked. And somebody captures that moment.
Mhm.
And that's what I want to remember.
Mm.
That love, the joy, the adventure. And it's hard. We were supposed to have a whole life here together, have that all the time, bring up our kids in that kind of love and adventure and energy. And we didn't get to have that. So it's those kind of things that are really, really hard in the aftermath of any sudden traumatic death. But suicide also brings with it all kinds of other complications of the fact that it's difficult to talk about. It's difficult for people to understand how somebody could get to that place. And so I went to these support groups, and I remember listening to other people's stories and feeling like the pain and the heaviness in the room from all the people left behind. Helpful from the standpoint of I'm not alone here. There's lots of people here to
Mhm.
help walk with us. But then having
Yeah.
this moment of, you know what, somebody's got to do something about this. This is a lot. And then going, oh crap, it's me. Like I've got to do something about this. And I got this full-time job doing this other thing, which I actually loved. I loved working with the students, helping them figure out who they wanted to be in the world. It was actually incredibly rewarding. Um, but I thought, this is why I'm on this earth. Like this. I need to figure something out here. I don't know what it is yet, but I feel very called and compelled. Uh, so luckily, again, my university said, go for it, which who does that? I'm like, I think I need to do something around suicide prevention. They're like, yes. So I got, luckily, a huge grant from the government. The SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, were giving out these huge grants to
Mm.
very large universities. And my tiny little university had 1,200 people. Tiny. We got the
Oh,
same
wow.
grant as
Yeah.
like the University of Colorado and the University of Arizona, like huge. We got the same amount of money. And I was able to do so much with that money. And one of the things we just looked at, okay, what's missing in the landscape of suicide prevention? There's a whole bunch of things. One of them was about men. Men die by suicide way more than women. Women attempt more, men die more. And often men die on their first attempt. And most of those men are in the middle age years and they don't reach out to mental health services. So, how do we
Mm.
find them? They're not in education anymore. They're not reaching out to really any kind of healthcare. So, we can't reach them through healthcare. One attempt and it's fatal. We don't get a warning sign through an attempt. It's work. So that's where the journey into doing suicide prevention through workplace started. In those moments at Regis at my university, going, okay, where's the biggest gap that we need to fill here? The workplace has not been involved, and they're the ones most likely to be intersecting with people that are most at risk. So that's a little bit of it.
So why those stats that you said women attempt more, men die more? Why is
Mhm.
that?
So my first piece around that is there's no difference in despair. So what those data tell us is that
Mm.
men and women, or however you identify your gender, there's lots of despair happening, especially in our country. That's an equal level. Women live through their attempts, not because they're less intent, but just because they tend to choose less lethal means. So they're much more likely to survive their attempt. So women tend to choose
Mhm.
things like overdosing or cutting, which the
Mm.
chances of you living through that are up. It also, there's a time difference. So you engage in the behavior, and then a bunch of time happens before it becomes a critical life and death situation. So what also happens in that window of time is that people rescue themselves. They say, my God, what have I done? and they call 911 or they reach out to a friend and there's a chance that we can save your life kind of thing. Men tend more to use more lethal means, mostly firearms or
Mhm.
hanging. And there's just no window there. It's just impact is immediate and you don't get that second chance. So it's much more about the means that are chosen than anything else. Um, yeah.
So what is you've been through this journey of suicide in the workplace. What does your work look like today? I mean, what are the things you've learned along the way, and what does that look like today for you?
Yeah. So the early days, it was myself and another psychologist, Rick Ginsburg. We were like, woohoo, suicide prevention in the workplace. We figured something out here. Yay, we were so excited. And we developed these programs and trainings and all this stuff. And we rolled it out. Ta-da, look at this. And we would go knock on the doors of, organizations and corporations and say, hey, how about some suicide prevention in the workplace? And people were like, no, like,
Mhm.
no, that's a medical issue. People need to take that stuff up with their doctors. And we'd say, but they're
Mm.
not, and they're working. Can you do something? And no, it was a long, slow slog at the beginning. Um, it was scary for employers. They worried about liability. I'm like, you take on heart attacks. Like, can you take this on? You could save a life. Like, it makes a difference. Nope, nope, nope. And then we
Mhm.
had some early adopters. So in 2013, right, we started in 2007, long slog. We had the little
Yeah.
bites here and there, but in 2013, we started to have some early adopters that did some deep dives into this work, and they were male dominated leaders. So one was in the construction industry, and one was in our Denver Fire Department, and both talk very publicly now about their early adoption work, and so I can talk about them. Um, but they showed that the implementation of comprehensive suicide prevention in the workplace made a huge difference, especially the construction company. He today,
Mhm.
the COO, who he had no peers that were doing it. He's just like, we've lost someone. This seems like the right thing to do. I don't know what to do. You seem to know what to do. Let's go. 3 months in, he said, holy crap, there's way more here than I ever imagined. People are struggling. They're worried about their children. Our employee assistance program is broken. We are onto something. Let's go national. And his organization underwrote the national rollout of construction working minds and a blueprint for construction suicide prevention. It was pretty incredible that he had that kind of faith and forethought that this was going to be a big
Mhm.
thing. We had no data at that point in time. Okay, 2013, 2014, 2015. But those of us in suicide prevention work knew that the data existed. We just didn't have it nicely organized or packaged with a credible research thing, just because we know who dies by suicide in construction and related male dominated industries are obvious candidates. So by the time the CDC came out with data, 2016, 2018, 2020, uh, we were ready and we had been ready for a long time to serve. We
Mhm.
were easily findable. And that became one of the tipping points when the CDC came out with reports that ranked industry by risk, construction consistently number one, number two. And then people were desperate for answers because then all the stories came out and we started to coalesce as a community, and we were ready to help, and that felt really good. And then, of course, during COVID, boom, like hockey stick moment. Every workplace in the world pretty much was prioritizing mental health and looking for answers and pathways and strategies and models and resources. And again, we were ready. So today, 85% of my book of business is focused on construction, which, if you
Mm.
asked me 10 years ago that that's where I would be like, I don't see how to get there. But now I'm like, this is absolutely where I need to be. Highest risk industry, not only highest risk industry, um, but a pragmatic industry. We got a
Mhm.
problem. We need to solve a problem. I work in several other industries like academia. Oh my gosh, let's talk about it and have 20 more committee meetings and still not do a thing. You know, um,
Sure.
construction is like, let's go. Let's try. Like, lives are being lost. People are suffering. Let's go. Let's figure things out here. And so we've been building things as we've been flying, which was also very exhilarating and exciting. And it's so rewarding. And then also, like when we're doing work, I can see right in front of me, like the needle is moving right in front of me. People are feeling
Mm.
heard and seen and known. They're having conversations with their coworkers right there in the workshop. about really important things that they have never shared before. It is phenomenal. This work has been phenomenal.
Why is construction number one?
Good question, right? So there's a lot of male-dominated industries. Why construction
Yeah.
rising to the top? So, and when you look at the top 10 list, it's all things like transportation, manufacturing, all these things. The top 1 and 2, they flip
Sure.
flop. It's extraction, which includes oil and gas and mining, and then construction. They flip flop.
Yep.
So there's certain aspects of both of those that increase even more risk than some of the others. This is probably true across all the male dominated industries, but there's a certain aspect that's kind of ratcheted up around tough mindedness. Like we handle stuff. And whether that's, our iron workers walking out on beams way up in the air, or if it's just the pressure of this industry, which is constantly do more with less, better, no mistakes, no safety, more, better, no mistakes, and then ratchet, ratchet, ratchet. So you stay competitive with more profit, better projects, all that stuff. It never ends. So you need a certain level of tough mindedness to survive in this industry. However, that flips on its head when it comes to really any health issue, whether it's pain or, you have the early signs of cancer or mental health or addiction. Like you're just going to white knuckle it through because that's how you found success in life. You just white knuckle it through all the hard stuff. When it comes to health issues, what that ends up doing is killing you, whether it's a heart attack, cancer that's not caught until stage 4, addiction that wrecks your life, or suicidal thoughts that end up being fatal because people have a lot of pride in their self-reliance. I'm a tough person. I solve my own damn problems. I don't burden other people with my things. People come to me to solve things. Like there's a lot of pride in that identity, but it flips on its head. And there's lots of research to show that people with high levels of self-reliance actually have high levels of risk for suicide. So that's part of it. Another piece is there is also a strong culture in the construction industry that the way you blow off steam, and everybody acknowledges tons of stress here, the way you blow off steam is through substance use. That's what you do.
Yep.
You get together, and it's not 1 or 2, it's like 10 drinks. And, sometimes you get together. Sometimes you're just doing it on your own because you're in a hotel room by yourself. And what else is there to do? So lots and lots of alcohol use, marijuana use, and also opiate use. That's not so much from the, hey, I'm going to cope tonight with a 6-pack. It is because I have a pain issue. That's usually the doorway into the opiate problem of construction. Is there some kind of pain, chronic pain, or an injury? What is the prescription you get? It's an opiate-based prescription. You're taking things according to the rules of your doctor, and you get addicted. And then that's a whole nother issue. So both the pain part increases risk because pain is misery, and also the opiate addiction is wicked. I have a loved one right now who's fighting for his life around it. Doesn't want to be addicted, really would like to not to be addicted. It's hard to get off that addiction. The withdrawals are brutal. There's lots of bad things that happen with that addiction, and fentanyl and all of those kinds of things. So there's that. There's a lot more if you want me to keep going. There's a long list of why construction is so high.
Yeah, no, and that's all. It's spot on. It's a shame to see. I mean, most people on a job site are relying on substance to get by.
Yeah.
It's a harsh world, and I just don't. I want to be. And I want to talk about, okay, if I'm a construction company, what can I do? If I'm an individual, what can I do in a moment here? But I want to really put the onus on construction companies and the actual industry itself, because I think the temptation is to put it on to individuals. They need to kind of figure this out. They're the ones struggling. It's really not our problem. But I think it's largely the situation created by the industry that creates the pressure and everything like you're talking about. I think, and even today, just the intolerance for any kind of mistake. Right. It's like, well, you growing up in this industry 30 years ago, you didn't have that intolerance, and that's how you learned. But now you're enforcing this standard that is arguably unachievable, or it is achievable, but you're not giving people the tools to achieve it. And it's I think there's a lot of systemic problems, and I know that word's overused nowadays, but I think there's a lot of problems starting within the construction industry as a whole, and just at the ownership level too, of the project owners, the general contractors, whoever's holding the contracts, saying you need to get this job done, yesterday. And it just, the standards across the board are crazy, and yet they're just expecting these human beings to act like they've always act. They're just machines. They're nothing more. They're an input. It's man hours. Just get the damn job done. And if you want to bitch about it, like, you can walk off the job site. You don't need to be here. But they can't act like that anymore because there's a big workforce problem. They can't just go hire more people. People are not replaceable anymore.
Correct.
which is
Boom.
great, because now they have to go.
Yes.
Yeah, now they're forced into behavior change. But
Oh, there's so
as
much there. There's so
starting
much there.
as a yeah, oh
What
yeah,
you just said. Yeah.
I'm big on this topic. But so, as a contractor, if I'm a contractor, I'm listening to this. I have not addressed mental health before. And this is, I'm going to knock it off my soapbox here. I'm going to get
Oh,
off,
I'm
but just
going
one
to
more
put you
minute
right
on it.
back on it because I'm with you. Yes.
Good. Yeah. What drives me nuts about safety in the construction industry or in the extraction industry, we're in natural resources too, is that it's safety, 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 because your well-being is our top priority. But then they never talk about mental health, which kills way more people in this industry, way more people, addiction, suicide, car accident, all of that. It kills way more people than anybody on a job site. And yet that's not even talked about. So you're saying my well-being is your top priority, but that's not true, because you'd be talking about this if it was. It's my well-being is your top priority when I'm on your job site, because it affects you from a liability standpoint, from an ability to get contract standpoint, because there are consequences if you don't take care of me. But off this job site, I can go kill myself. That's not your problem. And it really irks me, because I'm all for safety and I'm all for caring people, but I think there's a lot of I just don't find that true in a lot of companies. I find it true on their job sites, but off their job sites, they just don't care because they don't have to.
Oh my gosh, so much. I should have been making a list of all like, yes, 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 yes. All right. So going back to one of your first points, which was intolerance for mistakes. All right. So this ends up being very important in this conversation. I've
Mm-hmm.
written a couple of white papers, one on psychological safety and one on near miss psychology. Um, so
Mm.
they're all about
Mm.
like the near miss. We've got to, or incident reporting. We've got to be able to learn from these near miss situations and these
Yeah.
incidents so that we can. You have created a culture where it is not okay to have a mistake. That is
Mm-hmm.
not going to be forthcoming information. You are not going to be able
Mm-hmm.
to learn. People are going to hide that stuff because I don't want to be the head that pops up and gets chopped off. Well, it's the same thing true for mental health issues. If you don't have a culture of psychological safety where it's okay not to be okay, where it's okay not to be your fully functional self, like, and who can sustain top performance 24/7, 365? Nobody, right? Then
Yeah.
you are going to continue to have safety incidents and errors, and they're probably going to get more and more escalated because we can fix them when people raise their hand when the problems are small. We can't fix them when people go underground. So the whole kind of tying in psychological safety, do I feel like you have my back, is so critical for safety
Mm-hmm.
and emotional well-being throughout the whole thing. Your other comment about, they woke up to the place that they have to address this, because the data came out. And you mentioned that there's a discrepancy between job site fatalities and mental health related fatalities. It's not a small discrepancy. It's a huge discrepancy.
Huge.
Usually we're having about 1,000 people in the United States dying, slips, falls, trips, electrocution, those kinds of things. And every one of those lives matters greatly. And that's where we're focused, like saving those lives, and not just the lives, like saving those injuries, everything. Um, well over 5,000 construction workers die by suicide. That's just suicide.
Mm-hmm.
More than that die by overdose.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that die by the consequences of addiction, where your bodies just are giving out because you've worn them down through addiction. It's exponentially. And then people just say, well, that was their, illness. That's their health issue. And they're bringing that to the job site. Maybe. And also, it gets way exacerbated by the things that are
Mm-hmm.
happening on a job site, all the things that you were listing about, the really rough kind of lifestyle that you have. One of the things I didn't mention earlier that I think plays a massive role is that so many of both extraction and construction folks are traveling all the time,
Yep.
living in hotels at best, right? Some of them live in tent cities, away from their families, away from their faith community, away from their friends, eating poorly, drinking too much, not having those really meaningful things, missing out on all of their children or family rituals, milestones, all of that stuff. And in a grind, just every day, doing really hard work day after day after day after day, and losing that connection to the bigger meaning and purpose of their work. It's a hard existence. So and when we look at some other countries and what they're doing around this, it's fascinating and it's coming eventually. They're holding organizations accountable to
Mhm.
psychological hazard mitigation. And if they don't, they are held accountable legally. And so people can make claims. And there's actually been a criminal case in France. It was a telecommunications case, but the leadership, the executive leadership, created systems, processes, and a culture where people were treated incredibly poorly for a long time. There was an unbelievable number of suicide deaths that occurred and attempts. I think upwards of 80 people either attempted or died within a very short period of time. And the families held the company accountable. And the executives went to jail. They were held accountable criminally, not and
Mhm.
with fines and all of the things. Like that hasn't happened here yet, but it's going to, because the rest of the world is looking at these psychosocial hazards as true safety issues, and that an employer has a responsibility to create a work environment that is going to work well for people's emotional well-being, not just their physical well-being. So that's another thing that's coming. So when we're working with companies, you mentioned the third thing, which is really important today. What's their pain point? They can't recruit and retain talent, especially young
Yep.
talent. So they've got this aging workforce, huge growth in the industry, no workers
Mhm.
coming in the door, or they get them and then they leave because they realize, like, yeah, I'm not
Mhm.
signing up for this. COVID told us life is too short. I am
Sure.
not weathering through this awful thing. Even if I can make a lot of money, that's the other piece people woke up to.
Mhm.
Like money is just that. Like I want a life worth living. So they have realized, and exciting to me is they're starting now to compete a little bit about who gets this better, like who is really doing this work. Because I can tell you what, the Gen Zers, they will sniff you out if it's not deep commitment. If it's just superficial, like check the box, they're going to sniff you out and they're going to call you out. And they're not going to come. And so one of the exciting things I'm seeing is that the influx of younger generations are managing up, and they're like, yeah, you've got this all wrong. And it's not just, I've got a really great benefit package, and so all my troubled workers can go to counseling. They're like, we need some culture change here around how we treat each other, how we work every day, and how we're in this for the long haul, not just squeezing every ounce of productivity out of us every single moment. So it's
Mhm.
an exciting time. It's turning a Titanic around. There's a lot of things that need to change, but I get the privilege of presenting to a lot of CEO events, and these are mostly older white men, very wealthy,
Sure.
very
Yeah.
privileged, doing great work. They've led big companies, but they have a
Mhm.
certain perspective, and they are hungry, which also opens my heart. They are hungry to do the right thing. Um, and I'm like telling the 20 somethings, go have a conversation with your executive team, because you've been brought up in this. You are fluent in social and emotional learning. You've had it since preschool. Most of you have been in therapy at least once, if not multiple times, ongoing for many things. Like you get this in a way that your senior leadership doesn't. So you're going to have to help them understand what needs to change here. And then how do we get them also to look at the ways that they are driving psychological harm and be willing to mitigate that? That is the next level of challenge that we're facing. How do we do that? How do we do that? And let them still feel like they're productive and profitable and all of those things.
Well, and the thing is here, businesses don't change until they're financially incentivized to do so.
Correct.
They now, with this workforce problem that's not going away anytime soon, it will never go away until they figure this out. They're 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 starting to be financially penalized for
Hmm.
this. So but this is the cool thing about this. If you can figure this out as a business, this is a huge opportunity. If you
Yeah,
can figure out how to push back on some of these unreasonable practices, it doesn't. We don't even have to go that far. We just have to push a little bit here, and then we have to create just a little bit of psychological safety. We don't have to go dramatically change. We don't need nap pods on job sites. I think they hear that and they're like, "Oh my God, no, we can't become this. We're not Apple. We're a construction company. Damn it!" It's like, yes, that's great. Stay that way, but we can make these little adjustments. And if you make these little adjustments, your people are going to be valued. You're going to have less turnover. You're going to have better recruiting, and ultimately, you're going to make more money.
that's
That's
right.
crazy. If you take care of your people, you make more money. And that's what I've been trying to get into these people's heads for 5 years now. It's, guys, I'm not asking you to make less money here. I'm asking you to make some changes that are going to make your people better off and also make you more money. So come on, like we can do this together here. Everybody wins.
That's right.
But in
That's right.
short, as a company, what are some of the things I can do to start creating change? I know it's a process. I know this is a complex issue. Human beings are very complicated, and the industry doesn't like to hear that because we can control bulldozers and diesel fuel and materials. Humans, oh man, if it weren't for the damn people, this job would be easy. Yeah, I get that, but this is a human industry. So what could I be doing as a business owner or a leader or a young leader within a construction business to start creating some change here?
Cool. So I'm going to give you a resource first because I'm just going to hit some highlights and there's a lot more to all of this. So
Please.
workplacesuicideprevention.com goes into everything I'm going to talk about in a lot more depth. Workplacesuicideprevention.com. All right. So we have national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention, largely built on the trials of the construction industry, since they've been the industry that has come forward first and most forceful.
Mm-hmm.
And they've
Mm.
really paved the way for a lot of other industries, which again, you should all be proud. Um, if I had my druthers, if I could wave the magic wand of how I want to see this go forward, step number one, listen. Listen to your people. Listen to your people. Any kind of change process, we know you've got to involve people from the ground floor so they feel like it's by, about, and for them, and that you truly understand their experiences and they feel seen and known and that their input is respected. Deep listening, not just a survey that people are like, okay, we did it, check the box, move on. So when I work with large organizations and I work with a lot of unions as well, I say, let's listen first. And we create safe spaces, interviews, confidential interviews, small focus groups, all of these places where people are like, oh, you're never going to get our construction workers to talk about the. I'm like, watch me. Like everybody's got a story. They just
Mm.
need a safe place to share it. They actually really want to share it because it's a big part of what they've experienced in their
Mm-hmm.
lives. And as soon as one person raises their hand, they're like, oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, absolutely. And now we've got a whole room, sometimes 50 people talking about their depression, their addiction, and their loss. And it's powerful for that community to come together. So we get buy-in. That's the first part. We also get metrics. I know construction is all about the measurements and the metrics. We can get baseline information about how much do people know and trust the resources, like how many people have been impacted by these things. These are measurements we can send back to the leadership. And I'll tell you, I've worked in almost, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of construction organizations by this point. I do an anonymous and confidential "how has this shown up in your life" question, whether it's addiction, suicide, mental health issues, loss, etc. Suicide or overdose loss, and it's consistent. 90 to 100% of every single workforce says yes, these issues have shown up in my life. Well,
Mm-hmm.
leadership doesn't know that. Like they think, oh, it's the one-off person, who has this major breakdown and we've got to get rid of them. No, it's your entire workforce has this in some way or another, if not them directly, a first degree person in their life. So all of that listening on the front end helps us also create a strategy that makes sense for the organization, that's baked into their values and their culture. And also we surface things in those listening sessions that aren't all about go seek mental health resources as the solution. In those conversations, we hear about specific pain points that are related to operations, related, like one of the consistent things now with all of the virtual stuff is we lost our sense of belonging. Like we don't hang out anymore. We don't do
Mm-hmm.
social things. We don't do community service stuff anymore. All those things that help us feel like we were part of a family got thrown out the window as we have more jobs to do and we are doing everything else on back-to-back Zoom meetings. So things like that start to surface where there's other things in play. So that's the first thing. Listen and listen deeply. And then there's three levels of things that organizations can do to make a big difference. The first thing is what we call upstream work. So these are prevention oriented practices that either prevent people from ending up in that level of distress or despair, or if they do, because who gets out of this life without having some overwhelming thing happen to them? A divorce, a death,
Mm-hmm.
an injury, an illness, all kinds of stuff happens to us. So when people go through those incredibly tough times, what is already in place, either from their own practices of resilience or the community's resilience that will allow them to come back quickly. All right. So all that preventive stuff really revolves around different aspects of leadership engagement. And you alluded to the fact that sometimes it's positions of leadership. How are they standing up for this in a really authentic way? But it's also the informal leadership roles of people that are just the trustworthy people in the organization, the go-to people that know stuff. How do we get them engaged with this as well? Find the champions and storytellers that will move this issue forward in a heart way, not just in an operations way.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece is around reducing those psychosocial hazards. The workplaces that we work with don't get off the hook by just driving troubled people to counselors. We need to also address the things that are driving despair and distress by the way the business is being run. We can't get rid of all of them, but we can certainly work to mitigate them. And when I work with construction and extraction companies, we talk about NIOSH's hierarchy of controls. There's hardly a
Yeah.
job site I go to where that poster's not up in some job trailer somewhere. Everybody understands that when we remove the hazards from the environment, we're far more likely to have a better outcome than if we just encourage people to wear their PPE. Same thing with
Mm-hmm.
psychosocial hazards. When we remove them from the environment, we're going to be far more likely to have a psychologically safe, healthy, vibrant workforce than if we just tell people to go to counselors. So when I make that connection, they're like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. Still don't know what to do, but I kind of get it. So we uncover what
Mm-hmm.
those psychosocial hazards are and create a plan on how to mitigate them. And then the third upstream thing is really about how do we communicate about this publicly? It's not good enough to have a website page with a bunch of links and 1-800 numbers. If you're going through a really awful time, that just feels impossible to navigate. We need a
Yeah.
culture where people can feel open in connecting, that this is just what we talk about around here. We understand how the resources work. We are celebrating when people are showing up for one another, those kinds of things. So the preventive stuff, when we get that kind of thing right, just like with other kinds of safety issues, when we get the prevention thing right, we have far fewer stuff happening in terms of crises downstream. So I'll pause there. That was a lot.
No, that's great information. Something I've done that's been really effective is, so I've been in therapy for 3 years now consistently. It's game changer. Game changer. It is such a competitive advantage too, just as a human being, as a
Right.
business owner. It's awesome. And I talk about that. I talk about it. And especially like on a day I'll have therapy scheduled, I'll make it a point to say, well, I have to, be out of my meeting at this time because I have therapy at this time. Or, hey, oh, sorry, I just got out of therapy, so I might be a little drained, but, continue. Just mentioning it as much as I possibly can, or just talking about, man, like therapy has been so beneficial for me, and this is what it's done for me. And I've been open about my anxiety. I've been open about my emotions. I'm feeling sad today. I feel like shit today. I'm anxious today. And just saying I'm anxious, it brings all of these people into the conversation. Oh my gosh, me too. You're anxious? I'm anxious. I'm like, yeah, welcome to the club. And so many people, a long list now, have said, I went to therapy for the first time because I heard you talking about it. I don't tell people to go to therapy anymore. I've learned that lesson. You tell someone to go to therapy, it goes right to the ego. It's a hit to the ego. Hell no, I'm not crazy. Are you kidding me? But if I talk about how beneficial it's been for me, and I'm leading this business and I'm in the position I'm in, they're like, oh, okay. So if he's doing it and he seems somewhat level-headed, he's talking about how much it's helped him, maybe I should do that. And I think just something as simple as getting yourself as a leader to a place where you can openly talk about your issues, your emotions in therapy, whatever it is, wildly beneficial. People don't come over and talk to me very rarely and, oh, let me tell you about my feelings. It's not like that. But I'm impacting people by just saying, here's what I'm going through. You're not the only one. And here's what I've done to help me out. So that's been one of the most effective things I've done as a leader, is just talk about
100%.
my own trials and what I've done to deal with it, because that's inspired a lot of other people to figure their stuff out too, which has been
No,
shocking.
that's amazing, and absolutely, 100%. What's a cultural shift thing for a community is when a leader can do that. And so I challenge the leaders and I say, you should all, if you haven't yet, go to your EAP, because I always want them to test their EAP, because they find out a whole bunch of
Mm,
things. But go get some counseling. And if you're resisting to me in this
mhm.
moment, why? There's none of us that don't have issues.
Yeah.
We all have issues, whether it's in our marriage, in our, bad habits that we have, or parenting, or dying parents, or something. We all have issues that are keeping us up at night, that are wearing on us. Go seek a therapist and see what the process is like, because the other piece you pointed out is that people are more successful when they engage in mental health stuff, because you
Yeah.
realize, I stumble over this thing again and why? Oh, now I know, and now I can avoid it. You stop repeating patterns in your life that have held you back. You become more in tuned to other people's experiences and build that emotional intelligence. The other piece that you
Mhm.
mentioned is that sometimes people are afraid because they think, oh, people will think less of me if they think I'm somehow mentally unstable. Um, and the opposite tends to be true, which again, Brene Brown's research has shown for a long time. When people are vulnerable and say, here's the all of me, I've got stuff over here, it's hard. You become so much more trustworthy, seen as so much more courageous. Um, Seen as a whole person that is authentic, and I know what I'm dealing with here, not just your shiny sparkly self, but a whole person. You actually become a more impactful leader when you're able to do that in a very authentic way. So I just challenged and I said, if you're resisting this right now, just check in with yourself about why. What is the baggage you're carrying into this? Because you need to unpack that if you're going to successfully lead your organization in a culture change here. You've got to deal with your own stuff about what are your barriers around your own engagement with mental health first.
That's exactly. Well, but it starts to get to a point where it starts to get fun, because it's like, oh yeah, haha. So here's that behavior again. Oh, here's that feeling again. But I see it this time. I got it. And then, okay, hey, I want to go down this path, but that's the path I keep going down, and it doesn't work out. So I'm gonna actually take a left here, and I'm gonna kind of weave around and take another path, and then it works out. You're like, wow, so this actually does work. And I think people also have the stigma with mental health and therapy as it's something when to do when something bad happens. And
Right.
that's great. If you need that catalyst to go carry you into that, that's fantastic. But I view it as I work out every day, because my
Nice.
body, it needs that. It needs that physical exertion. It needs that stress and strain to become stronger. My mind's the exact same thing. So I view therapy, I'm really diligent about it. It's consistent, because even when I don't want to go, and like working out, this morning I was like half a mile into my run. I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to be here, but I did it because I know I need to. I know the benefits outweigh the shittiness of it in the moment. That's how therapy is. It's I do it consistently because it is essentially just like working out my brain. I need that no matter where I'm at, no matter how good life is, how bad it is. I need to foster that habit, because that is the strength of it. It's the compounding effect of therapy that I think it makes it really strong. Yes, figuring your stuff out, I think that's step one. And I think everybody's just perpetually figuring their stuff out and their baggage out. But I think it's also just continuously evaluating your emotions, evaluating who you are, how you're changing as a human being, how the environment around you is changing. It's life is so complex. There's always things to dig into from a mental health standpoint. I
Let me just address to kind of the spectrum of mental health support, because there's lots of ways people can
Yeah,
engage with mental health support.
please. Sure.
And not everything is for everybody. So I also want to put that out there, because your first foray into this, you might get a response that doesn't work for you. And a lot of times what people end up doing,
Totally.
and they're in their first foray into this, they go to their primary care doc and they say, hey, I'm not sleeping. I feel really stressed. What do they get? drugs. And again, I'm not anti-drug.
Mm.
Like when I went through my major depression and I wasn't sleeping at all. I needed to sleep before I could do anything else. I was
Hmm.
so distraught, so dysregulated. I needed to come to some kind of baseline of functioning before I could do anything else. And for me, that was getting myself to sleep, and ratcheting down some of the intensity a few notches so I could think clearly and then solve things one by one. So I'm very pro medication in situations where that's important, or for people who have really severe mental health conditions that involve psychosis or mania or those other kinds of things where medication can be
Yeah.
a regulator that is a lifesaver. But we are so pill happy, that that's what we do. So quick fix, which can help, but also doesn't really get to the root issues of things. So if that's the only thing you're getting, sometimes that's not enough, and sometimes it's just numbing out or medicating an issue that doesn't get resolved.
Hmm.
The other thing is
Yeah.
not all therapists are created equal, and so I also encourage people to think of it as like dating. Like if you don't gel with your therapist in the first or second session, that's okay. And in fact, if your therapist doesn't preempt that by saying, you know what, let's see if this is a good fit on the very first meeting, you should bring it up, because that's
Hmm.
how it goes. And a good therapist worth their salt will acknowledge that from the front end, that they can't always gel with everybody. They're human beings just like everybody else. And it's okay to say, this isn't working. It's nothing personal. I need to keep looking. And a good therapist would
Hmm.
understand that and say, absolutely, how can I help you figure this out? Um, so that process too of the trial and error of the medication, of finding the right therapist, is daunting, and discouraging sometimes for people who I just want to feel better. I just want to feel better. Why is this so hard? So it's good to have a buddy, a buddy like buddy who has had similar life experiences, who's a little bit farther down the path from me, who can help guide me to like figure out how to get there. Because if you're just Googling, like, I don't know, therapist, like it's going to be a needle in a haystack experience for you. And it's going to be very frustrating. Even going to your employee
Yeah.
assistance program or your insurance carrier and saying help, you're going to get a long list of names and have to make a bunch of phone calls. It's a rough go. So to get a buddy somehow who can be an advocate and just kind of walk alongside you as you're trying to figure it out is also important. In the world of mental health providers, the psychologists like myself, many of us are trained in different types of counseling, and
Hmm.
also assessments. That's kind of our little niche. Other types of counselors, master level counselors, marriage and family, addictions counselors. They all have different types of training and backgrounds. Social workers all have different types of training and backgrounds. So go, kick the tires, test things out, find a good fit for yourself. Or ask a buddy, like, what's worked for you? Help me shorten this exploration in the woods here. And usually people get that. The other thing I'll mention, is that for a lot of people, what's often needed is addiction recovery of one form or another. And I'm part of a 12-step community that has been a game changer for me. Like, just like you said, every day
Hmm.
I'm doing my things, like in the practice of what I've known has been helpful. And, there's a lot of myths and lore about what these 12-step groups are all about. But having lived through it, I can tell you the benefits for me have been unconditional acceptance. Doesn't matter where you are in your journey, you walk into the room, everybody's walked the path before you. There's unconditional acceptance. And two, there's like a process. Like there's things you can do every single day. There's steps you can take that help you think about things. And again, not everything fits for everybody. You take what works for you and you keep going. And it just keeps you accountable, like you were saying, accountable every day to these practices that help you stay in the place that you want to be and grow. So those is just some of the things I encourage people to think about. Oh, the crisis lines are another thing. Like people are like, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm
Hmm.
in a crisis. If you want to talk to someone and your emotional intensity is pretty high and you think it's good to talk to someone, just call. They would much rather have
Yeah.
you call before you've already taken a bottle of pills or you're standing on the ledge of something. Like call them. That's their job to help you figure out, what needs to happen from here on forward. And they're 24/7, they're free, anonymous and confidential. It's been a real game changer for the mental health world to have that kind of resource, available to everybody.
Yeah, and all of that, it's hard work. It's hard work. But I've never met anybody that's gone through it and done the work and said, "Man, that wasn't worth it." It's always worth it. it's always worth it if you put in the work. And I understand the pills from an imbalance standpoint, and I just need sleep standpoint. But I feel like a lot of people, they go to the pills, one, because they're pushed by the medical system and the pharmaceutical industry. Two, that's the easy button. I just need the easy button. I just need to figure this out. I'm going to take some pills, my problem's solved. No, that's the beginning. That's getting you to a point where you can start to solve your problems. That's not going to solve your problems. And if you're relying on that, I mean, all you're doing, or you're still just bearing your problem. You're still just running away from that. It's going to, no matter where you're at, no matter what you've gone through, and it could be bullying as a 9-year-old. Maybe that's the worst thing you've gone through in your life, but that's still terrible to a human mind versus a death of a parent or living in a war zone, whatever it is. There's different trauma, but no trauma is necessarily worse than other trauma from a
Right.
from a developmental psychology perspective. And working through that is hard work. But again, I've never met anybody that's worked through it and said, man, that I got to the end, and not that you get to the end, but I got through it, and I just that wasn't worth it at all. It's a fantastic feeling. Going back to, we talked a little bit just about being healthy. I want to end on that because we talked about companies. There's a lot companies can do. I don't want to let individuals off the hook here because I think there's a lack of personal responsibility. And I think people need to take ownership, which is easier said than done in a lot of cases, but take ownership of themselves. What can you do from a personal standpoint beyond seeking help from a talking to someone standpoint or a therapy standpoint? What can you do as an individual to help you through these issues as well?
Okay, cool. I want to just make 2 more comments about the companies because also there's midstream and downstream. Offer your people training
Please.
on resilience and also on how to have conversations, especially your managers. Number 2, consider developing a peer support program, especially in our male-dominated industries. People are far more likely to go to a peer than a manager or their supervisor or their leadership or the EAP or HR. They're going to go to a peer. Get your peer, get a formal peer support program. And then downstream, have a
Mm-hmm.
crisis response plan in place before the crisis happens, for mental health emergencies in
Mm-hmm.
particular. So there's a whole bunch more there. Companies, you got to figure this out. So workplacesuicideprevention.com. All right. Your point 2. It's not just the company's job. I think with the whole conversation around burnout lately, there was hardly a person on earth that didn't experience burnout in some form or another during COVID. It was just rough all the way.
Yep.
And people viscerally had this experience about burnout, but the pushback came like, it's you, company, you're driving this, da, 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 da. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of pieces of that. But you're staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning playing video games, drinking a 12-pack. You're not exercising, you're eating crap. Like, you have a personal responsibility to your well-being as well. It's not all the company. And I get it. It was hard during COVID. We all just resorted to comforts and things that got us through the days. But at the end of the day, we have to be advocates for our own well-being and prioritize our emotional well-being just as we would other pieces of our health. So, for many people, we understand the benefits of exercise. It's hard to do and it doesn't feel good in the moment, but our bodies look better, our health metrics look better. We have more energy to do things we love. And it just feels better. We get that. We don't understand necessarily the practices that we need to put in place to have that work for our emotional health. And these things are all connected. It's not like they're separate pieces, but we've run to the physical health thing quicker than the emotional thing. I think partly for vanity reasons. We look better when we take care of our nutrition and fitness, but our emotional health plays into that in a large way. So there's lots of ways that we could do this. We've talked a lot about like ongoing therapy or support group in some way that is just part of your weekly way that you take care of yourself, not just when the crisis hits. But there's also other things that people do every single day. And again, what works for me might not work for other people, but I'll share what I do because when I get back to traveling, which is what's happening now, I have to say it out
Mm-hmm.
loud and remind myself this is the bedrock that gets you to where you want every single day. So don't lose sight of it. And one of them is my daily support meetings. Meditation. I'm not a good meditator. If you can see, a lot of energy going on here. When I first
Mm-hmm.
started meditating, I got 2 settings. This and off. So I would just fall
Yeah.
asleep. I'm like, this is dumb. Like, I'm just falling asleep, but I don't want to fall asleep. It's the beginning of my day. I need to get going. But I had to figure this out during COVID because I was so ramped up with anxiety, as many people were. I had to figure out how to calm myself, to be present. And also the things that happened for me through meditation is I center on, I guess, like my connection to things bigger than myself. It's a spiritual practice. And
Hmm.
so I come through that, even if it's just a 5 or 10 minute thing. That's pretty much all I can do. But it matters. I come through that and I start my day with a sense of calm, but also gratitude and connection. For me, it's important I do it in front of my window that looks out into nature. So all of these things happen. Um, for me, and I front load my day. So it takes me about 2 hours in the front of my day to get through all of these ritual practices, but absolutely worth it. It's the investment of my wellness every single day. And I get up very early to make that a priority. I walk my dog outside in Colorado under the night sky. I'm the only one up, and it is gorgeous. I have time with my beloved pet. I have quiet time. I do gratitude prayers, if you will. I connect to the stars. I drink my coffee. I come back. I'm ready to go. Um, Journaling. That's been
Hmm.
another practice. Again, don't have a lot of time, nor is it my strength to do long entries. But every single day, I force my mind to go into what I'm grateful for. And it can be something superficial. I'm often grateful when I have a good night of sleep. I just feel blessed when that
Sure.
happens, but it could be,
Yeah.
for the health of my family or, bigger buckets of things. Meaningful work often ends up on that list. I feel very grateful that I have meaningful work, but it could also be like lighter things. Like in this moment, I'm really grateful for my fuzzy slippers because my feet are warm and it just feels good, right? Could be a superficial thing like that too. And just like take that moment, notice what you're grateful for, drive it down. And then the other part of the journaling is around what's in the future that I can look forward to. Because if your day
Hmm.
looks hard, if you've got a lot of conflict and stressors and things aren't going right, having your brain at the beginning of your day scan the horizon for like, that's going to be cool, or that's going to be meaningful, or that's going to be time with someone I love. And I can tell you there were days during COVID I couldn't find it. I'm like, everything that I was looking forward to got canceled, destroyed. I don't know what I'm looking forward to. And to make my mind focus on something that I could look forward to was definitely a practice that needed intention. But I got there. There's always something to look forward to, even when you're suffering, and that just kind of helps balance your mind out a little bit. So those are all pieces of that emotional well being. And my dear friend Sarah Gears says we need to go on beyond superficial self care, which for some people might look, oh, take a bubble bath or blah 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 blah, and really look at ways that we do soul care. um, and whether or not you believe in the soul as this mystical thing, that is everybody's kind of own perspective on stuff. But we've been doing tons of interviews with people, and generally there's a consensus that there's an essence of who we are that just came into the
Hmm.
world and is trying to live a best life kind of thing. Um, and when we can take care of that soul, which usually involves deep connections with other people, deep connections with things larger than ourselves, that's where we have a much better opportunity to weather the hardships of life. So shifting to this idea of soul care has actually been a great way to have this conversation that takes it kind of out of the realm of mental illness, which some people balk against. Like, there's nothing wrong with my brain. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But how do you take care of the essence of who you are?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Would you mind repeating? You've repeated it a few times. What's the website, the resource people can go to learn more?
Well, I'll mention just a couple. So one is workplacesuicideprevention.com is where you'll find the national strategy with
Yep.
many of the steps that I mentioned. If people want to connect with me, it's my name, SallySpencerThomas.com. And then we also have a construction specific website that dives deeper into all the construction
Hmm.
specific things and extraction, other types of energy people, like all of these similar industries are coalescing around similar things. And that's
Sure.
Construction Working Minds, constructionworkingminds.com. It's been quite a journey.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the journey with us today. Those websites will be in the show notes if you want to check those out. I encourage you to check those out. I will be checking them out after this. And Dr. Sally, I appreciate you coming on Dirt Talk today.
This was fun and fabulous. And thank you for your leadership and your story as well.
Appreciate it. All right, everybody. That's a Dirt Talk episode.